It all started with a sound that wasn't supposed to exist. On board the Lyra 9 orbital station orbiting Saturn, astrophysicist Theo Morales interrupted his shift when the sensors picked up an anomaly, a signal coming from the Tethys Nebula, more than 1,000 light-years away. It wasn't a random pattern or a pulsar emission. It was music, complex, harmonic, with variations that suggested intent. Theo turned up the volume, expecting cosmic sizzles, but what filled the room was a hypnotic sequence of chords that seemed to breathe. On Earth, the news exploded like a media supernova. For the first time, humanity was being greeted not in mathematics, but in art. The composition, provisionally named the Tethys 1 sequence, intrigued scientists and artists. The UN convened the Global Interdisciplinary Council and, under its tutelage, the Aurora Project was born, a collaborative effort between physicists, musicians, linguists, and sound engineers. In less than 3 months, the melody was converted to human instruments. The quartet responsible for the first public performance was carefully chosen, and the stage would be the Global Art and Science Hall in Geneva, a hybrid space where knowledge met sensitivity. It would be broadcast live to the entire planet. On the night of the performance, the world held its breath. The first notes resounded like the whispers of stars. The silent audience seemed suspended in time. As the music progressed, a slight vibration filled the room. The air seemed to crystallize into colors. Shades of blue and amber danced across the stage. Then, at the end of the third movement, a luminous aurora formed in the center of the stage, enveloping cellist Clara Nishimura. She looked around in wonder, as if seeing beyond what was visible. She smiled, played the last note, and disappeared. No pain, no sound, only light, panic, screams, paralysis. The concert was interrupted. Scientists rushed the stage. Nothing remained but the cello and the bow floating for a second before falling. The aurora dissipated as if it had never existed. The press spoke of abduction. Conspiracists shouted, "Dimensional portal." The authorities, powerless, claimed to be investigating. But at the core of the Aurora Project, an uncomfortable truth was gaining strength. Music was a bridge, not a metaphor, a real, resonant structure that touched the very foundations of reality. Theo Morales, tormented by guilt, for it was he who had activated the first signal conversion, immersed himself in the recorded data. When he analyzed the vibration of the aurora in slow motion, he noticed something terrifying. The light pattern responded to the notes played with perfect synchrony, as if it had been programmed to open at that exact moment. Weeks later, Clara would return. But not as they had hoped. Clara reappeared 20 days later. She was naked, covered in a thin cloak of bluish mist, in the center of the same stage where she had disappeared. Her body was intact, but her eyes, once brown, now pulsed with greenish tones, as if reflecting an inner aurora. She couldn't remember her own name, nor did she recognize Theo Morales, who welcomed her with a trembling hug. But when a cello was placed in her hands, her fingers danced over the strings with the same fluidity as before. A new melody was born there, something never heard on Earth. They recorded every note. They called the composition the Tethys 2 sequence. Clara said she had been on the other side, in a place of liquid light, where color spoke and time moved like the tide. The beings who lived there, entities of vibration, had no bodies, but forms in a constant flow of sound. She didn't hear voices, but emotions. Each being was a living melody. According to her, she was invited to listen, not forced to enter. And now, she brought the second part of the message. Another musical sequence, different, denser, a new fragment of the unknown symphony. The Aurora Project was transformed overnight. Musical missions began to be planned. Musicians and performers started experimenting with variations of the Tethys sequence, trying to access other realities. Some versions provoked nothing. Others created subtle distortions in space. Shadows projected without a light source, particles suspended in the air, people recounting memories that weren't their own. A blind violinist played a variant and, for 3 minutes, saw his dead mother's face in a steam mirror. Meanwhile, Clara continued composing. Her hands didn't shake, but her dreams became disturbing. She spoke in her sleep in languages that no software could translate. In her dreams, she heard fragments of unfinished music, as if she were trapped in a symphony that never reached its climax. It was Alina Sayuri, a young synesthetic composer and member of the project's creative core, who noticed the pattern. Each fragment returned by the explorers was a harmonic variation of the same central theme. Divided symphony. Not a series of separate messages, but parts of a whole. A living score scattered throughout the cosmos, waiting to be assembled and understood. Alina immersed herself in the recordings and, with the help of interpretive artificial intelligence, mapped the frequencies and identified a common matrix between all the sequences. When superimposed, the variations created a harmonic design with almost perfect symmetry. That couldn't be a coincidence. Someone, or something, was composing a universal work and using music as a communication bridge between dimensions. But there was a problem. The closer they got to the full melody, the more unstable the tests became. Small portals opened involuntarily. Objects disappeared. Instruments vibrated on their own. One technician had his hand blown across by a translucent breeze and came back with his skin marked by fluorescent symbols. The authorities urged caution. Some wanted to shut down the project. But Alina knew. What they had in hand was just the beginning. And the next melody, the one Clara began to hear in her dreams, promised more than passages to other worlds. It promised access to the very architecture of reality. It was like trying to assemble a cosmic mirror with scattered fragments of sound glass. And Alina was increasingly convinced that the reflected image would be the very soul of the universe. After months of work, she composed the first unified version of the Song of the Dawn, bringing together all the known variations. Clara's, those of the traveling musicians, and those that arose spontaneously in anomalous phenomena. The resulting symphony wasn't just beautiful. It was alive. Sounds that reacted to different listeners, that changed according to the environment. When played on a low scale, the music altered human brainwave patterns and produced hypnagogic images in those who listened to it. Portals, unknown constellations, shapes that seemed to watch back. During an isolated experiment, a harpist called Mikhail played a specific sequence and disappeared in front of 3 cameras. He returned hours later, in a fetal position, muttering, "The song is the key, but the door leads to ourselves." By now, the Aurora project was no longer just a scientific initiative. It had become a cultural movement. Groups of alternative composers began to create their own variations. Streaming platforms viralized interpretations of the symphony, and millions of people started listening to it, without knowing what they were activating. Cases of spontaneous resonance multiplied. Collective visions, memory lapses, brief appearances of luminescent entities. But the music was also corrupting. Some said they felt empty inside after hearing the deepest notes. Others reported continuous dreams in which they woke up in distorted versions of their own lives. The most worrying came from a child. "The melody is teaching us to stop being human." Meanwhile, Alina made progress in reconstructing the symphony. With each new piece inserted, the disturbances increased. Objects levitated. People forgot their names. One researcher went blind when he stared at an illuminated score. The interpretive AI began to generate compositions of its own, all leading to the same incomplete ending, always interrupted by an indefinable note. It was as if the last part of the song was forbidden, or sacred. Despite this, something in Alina pushed her on. Not out of vanity, but out of a silent certainty. The melody was an access code. Not just to parallel worlds, but to the very basis of reality. A fundamental sound prior to time. The birth frequency of the cosmos. But she wasn't the only one to come to this conclusion. In the underground, a cult had emerged called the Listeners of Silence. They believed that the melody was a divine revelation, a call to transcend the flesh and live in vibration. They were preparing a planetary concert. A group of musicians and fanatics who planned to play the complete symphony simultaneously on all continents, including the final note, which is still unknown. Theo Morales, now an advisor to the project, warned Alina. If they play that last note, something bigger than us may awaken. And we may not be ready to hear what comes next. But it was too late. The next day, Alina received a cryptic invitation. Coordinates, date and time. The concert would take place in 7 days' time. And whether she took part or not, the world would hear the last note. The concert began at midnight, in absolute silence. Live broadcasts in 173 countries. Entire cities gathered in squares, dark halls, deserts illuminated by big screens. Alina Sayuri was in an abandoned theater in Kyoto, summoned by a group of the listeners of silence. Next to her, Clara Nishimura, now completely lucid, although different. Her eyes no longer pulsed, but seemed to contain frozen stars. The musicians positioned themselves in front of instruments made of sound crystal, each tuned to harmonic frequencies taken from Tethys variations. The first notes of the symphony echoed like the sigh of the universe. The air became dense. The weather became irregular. People all over the planet reported simultaneous déjà vus. Some cried for no reason. Others saw versions of themselves projected onto walls, reflections and smoke. And then the last note, played by Clara. A sound that didn't belong on any earthly scale. It was neither low nor high, it was total. It penetrated the bones, passed through time. The skies went black for a few seconds. Stars disappeared and reappeared in new positions. Gravity floated away. Thoughts were shared without speech. And the earth listened, not with its ears but with its essence. As if the planet, for a moment, was part of a great instrument and vibrated in response to the cosmic melody. Portals of light opened up in specific regions. Deserts, oceans, forests. But nothing came out of them. Instead, something entered. Data, images, knowledge. Mental maps appeared spontaneously in the musicians' minds. Universal knowledge, encoded in sounds, shared between all those who listened to the final note with an open heart. Formulas that united physics and music, memories of other civilizations, visions of distant worlds where life evolved in the form of frequencies. But not everyone accepted. Thousands went mad. Others simply blew out like candles in the wind. The world hung in the balance. Reality, for a few moments, seemed malleable, like a score that could be rewritten by anyone who understood its deep harmony. When everything stopped, Alina was on her knees. Her mind was throbbing. She had understood. The music wasn't a message. It was an invitation. The last note was not the end of one symphony, but the beginning of another cycle, an entrance to something greater. Clara, serene, approached and whispered, "They gave us the chance to compose together with the universe. But now it's our turn to decide which song we want to sing." Days later, the portals closed. Reality stabilized. But the echoes remained. New composers began to emerge. Children who heard melodies where no one else did. Scientists who visualized space structures as dynamic scores. And a new era began, not based on domination, but on resonance. Now, the world no longer seeks merely to survive. Seeks to harmonize. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel for more fiction that defies the impossible. Share this video with anyone who believes that music can be the language of the universe. And tell us in the comments, would you listen to Aurora's song all the way through?